Hello. Have you ever wanted to dive into your financial performance, but weren't really sure where to start? You would maybe go into QuickBooks, but there's a lot of different options and ways to run reports. And you always got maybe confused or it took longer than expected, and you ended up giving up and doing something that you were more familiar with. What I want to do is show you an example of a Tableau dashboard that would be connected to QuickBooks data on the back end. This one happens to be connected to QuickBooks, but it really could be hitting any ERP or financial system. And what it's going to do is look at that raw data and try to distill it in such a way to make a profit and loss statement more interesting than just looking at straight numbers on a screen. So what we're going to do is, I'll show you a demo of that in a second, but it's going to be trying to point us in areas that we can find areas to improve our overall profitability for the business in future periods. So what we're going to do is break down the various metrics related to profitability, see how those compare to a previous period and how they look as they trend over time. We're also going to look specifically at our main expenses because that is oftentimes something that we can manage. We're going to see what expense categories have had the most volume over the last few months, and again, how that compared to previous periods to see if things up or down. And by the end of this, you should be able to spend a few minutes looking at the dashboard and have a really good feel and comfort level for your profit and loss statement. Okay, so now we have our dashboard up on the screen. Give me a few minutes first to orient you on what we're looking at, and then we'll try to find some takeaways as we walk through this dashboard. First up in this upper area, this is showing that we're comparing different periods against each other. So this one is showing we're doing Q4, and we're comparing that to Q2 and Q3, all from year 22. Next up, we have some main KPIs. So we're looking at sales, we're looking at margin percent, and then net income percent. And then are those trending above or below previous period? And then finally looking at a trend graph to see how each month in the last 12 months has gone over time. Next up on the right-hand side, we're looking at another graph, and this is a trend graph and also showing some monthly detail. The different colors on the graph are if it's a good guy to profitability. So is it an income measure or is it a bad guy? Is it an expense or a cost of goods sold? So for each month, you'll see the green and the blue bars, those go above the zero line, and then the red and the orange bars are below because those are expenses. And then we're displaying on the screen, was it a profitable month? Were we good? Were we in the green? Did we make money? That'll be a month like this where our profit percent was 78% and we made $109,000. On the other side of things, if we were to look at April, for example, that's showing that we had a negative net income of about $30,000. So we had a loss of about 24% of sales. Okay, coming down here to the bottom now, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper to our main expenses because a lot of times expense is something that we can readily control, or at a minimum, we should understand what they are and what our big drivers are. So for this business we're looking at, you'll see some of the main expense categories. If you were to hover over any of these, you'll see within like payroll expenses, we have a few subcategories. In this case, we're looking at wages is the main one. That's not a big surprise. Then we have taxes and a few other ones to the side. And we'll also see, are they up or down for the month? Next up in this middle section, we're going to compare each of those to the previous period. So how to read this is if the bar is on the green side, like these over here, that means expense was down. So that's a good thing for us, right? Expense was down, so we made some more money. If it's on the red side, that means that the expense was up compared to the previous period. So that would be a bad guy for us. And then finally, further over here on the right-hand side, we're going to see individual or trend each month for the last 12 months. So we could see, has the most recent month been normal, or there may be an outlier or something that stands out that we should look into some more. Okay, so let's go back through and pull out a few takeaways. One is that sales for this business can be a little bit spiky and it's kind of seasonal in the summertime. Maybe not a big surprise for a brewery, and happens to be a brewery in a tourist area. So their sales are higher in the summer and usually lower in the winter. Their margin for most of the year was pretty flat, but then in December, they took a pretty big hit. So that's something we'll want to understand a little bit more. And then their net income for the year, they had a good month in January. It looks like it was a little unusual. That looks like kind of an outlier, right? And then most of the year, the rest of the year, they were either just slightly profitable, or in most cases, especially towards the end of the year, they were a little bit unprofitable each month. And we can see what some of the drivers are of that. We saw January was a good month for net income, and a lot of that was this other income category that happened in January, but didn't occur at all through the rest of the year. So that's really what drove the majority of the profitability for January, was that one-time other income. Otherwise, our sales stay relatively flat through the year, but we saw they spike up some in the summertime. Cost of goods sold kind of follows through with the volume. And then a few months we saw a larger expense, maybe than what would have been expected. An example of that would be August. So we saw a much larger orange bar than we normally see. And probably not surprising, that was also our lowest profitability month, where we lost $50,000 and profit margin was negative 31%. Okay, so now as we're coming down to our main expenses, we'll see that these three categories drive the majority of our expenses. I already pointed out that we could hover over each of these and see what's driving it. One thing that stands out a little bit is of our main expense categories, rent, utilities, and maintenance, so kind of stuff on our building, was the largest in the red at 20% higher expenses than earlier in the year. So that's something I think we probably want to understand more. We can see which of these categories were either good or bad for the period. And next up, we're looking at this trend graph. So we'll see that for this category, we were relatively flat throughout the year, and then it really spiked up in December. So something happened in December that was unusual for the rest of the year. We won't be able to get on this dashboard into that specific detail, but we have another one where we'd be able to see exactly what vendor that was for and what drove that expense. Okay, so that was a look at our income summary dashboard. I hope that was interesting to view. A few things that we were able to point out are understanding really quick, what is our overall profitability and how has that trended throughout the year? Are we currently more or less profitable than we were previously in the year? And in this case, we had a few outlier months that were very unprofitable. And we had one that was in January that was really high. We saw what some of those main drivers were and what months they happened in. And then finally, we were able to dive into some of our expense categories a little bit more and see what some drivers are to larger expenses, especially in December for that one that we looked at specifically. So if you'd like any more information on this, or if you have questions, and especially if you'd like to see your data in this dashboard to see what insights we can find on your income and profitability summary, please contact me. My email is jeremy@centralcoast-analytics.com. Again, that email is jeremy@centralcoast-analytics.com. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.